All right, it's time to do the wrap up. I read 7 things in June, and honestly, I felt pretty good about what I read. I don't feel like there were any huge misses. I actually was really happy with how I ended the month. I felt like I had a good reading momentum, especially considering all the stuff I was juggling in June. June was like a really big teaching month, had family in town, emotions happened, but the reading I was able to prioritize, it hit well. So we're just going to go kind of chronological-ish because I tried to make groups, but there just really weren't enough and nothing was really grouping the way I wanted it to. So we're just going to go through it, starting with the Octavia Butler that I read. Because this is what my patrons voted for me to read because I was almost done reading Octavia Butler. So I'm like, I could read these things and then I'm done. I can make my Octavia Butler video. And it's like, yes, I can finally do that. And so now I have my Octavia Butler video out there, which makes me happy. Even though, for some reason, people do not want to click on it. I do not know why, but it's okay. I am very, very proud of that video. So the first thing I finished was actually the Unexpected Stories, which I don't believe were generally published with her consent. She passed away and these were published. One of them is a short story that I do believe had been published somewhere previously. And both of these reminded me of things from the patternist world. One reminded me a lot about Mind of My Mind, so that era of patternist, which is like mid to late 20th century. And the other one was a lot like a novel that she no longer wanted to be in print called Survivors, which is about this planet with these alien species whose hierarchy is based off fur color and the amount of blue. And there's one type that's like completely blue, and you need one to, I don't know, it's about their culture and things like that. And this novella actually goes really into that culture. And I don't know, for me, having read The Survivor way back a couple years ago, I was like, oh, it's nice to be back in this world building and seeing the ideas she was playing with in their culture and how they handle power disputes and how they handle getting a new leader if genetics don't, come through. It was interesting. Neither of these were like huge standouts, but they were a pleasant way to spend a couple hours while I was doing yard work, so yay. And then I read Fledgling, which is the last officially published book by Butler while she was alive, I believe, and the last one I needed to read. And I've always heard of it as the vampire book, and I always knew that the main character looked 10, and I was nervous because so many people just had such aggressively, uncomfortably negative responses to it. But I was also curious just because I've read a lot of Butler, and I've read a lot of Butler that people, hadn't gotten to yet, because they're I don't know, they're not deep cuts or anything like that, but it's just there are certain Butler you get to first because they are kind of more the tried and true, people like them, more accessible works. So I'd read some of the other stuff that I'm like, well, she was really uncomfortable over here. So I wonder if it's that much more uncomfortable or if it's in the same area. And I would say for me that this is definitely not more uncomfortable for me than some of her works that have made me aggressively very ick factor. I always know it's intentional. It's never I think Butler believes the things that are happening. But so for me, it worked out pretty well. And I actually thought the ending was fairly optimistic, especially for a Butler. When Butler looks at community, she tends to be very, jaded, I guess I would say. A lot of realism. You can't have perfect community dynamics. Everything's going to be a bit parasitic. There's always a power imbalance. In the end of this, although you might still wonder, is this an okay way for communities to be formed and to exist? Because there are a lot of issues. This was by far, for me, of all the communities and where I've left them in her other series, the most stable and probably fulfilling for all those involved, with the caveats that it's still not amazing. So yeah, and I thought it was interestingly paced. The first half of it was very mystery thriller, character with amnesia, people are out to get her, what's going to happen? We're filling in the gaps. And the end is kind of this societal court case. So it kind of had an interesting blend of pacing and I guess pseudo subgenres. I enjoyed it. So yeah, I have that Butler video that I can point you to if you want to know my recommended where to start with, and also how I kind of rank the works from, I guess, least disturbing to most disturbing. All of her works are fairly heavy. So again, a disclaimer there. All right, the next up, let's see if my memory can do this. I believe it was Shakespeare Was a Woman and Other Heretical Thoughts. It's a nonfiction book that I read because Leanna at Leanna's Library had read it and made a standalone video on it, and I just thought it was really interesting. I was like, I do not know a lot about Shakespeare. And I wouldn't say that if I wanted to continue knowing about the origin of Shakespeare's plays and poems, this is where I would stop. I was more just curious and was kind of wanting a podcasty nonfiction, and it delivered on that. Now, I like Shakespeare plays, but I'm truly not a connoisseur. I've read the plays that we were forced to read in school, and for some reason, in the American school system, even though we have countless playwrights, American and otherwise, you can be taking American literature and you will still be reading a Shakespeare play. So I've read 4 to 6 Shakespeare plays. I really like his sonnets. I enjoy the works that are under the penned name of William Shakespeare. But I've never really thought about the author, and I honestly just truly thought, since it was written so long ago, that if there ever is speculation about who the author might be, it all felt kind of like, yeah, probably. There's probably room for speculation. In my scientific rigor, the proof I would need to know for sure someone is X author is probably a different level than people who are historians or other humanitarian things. So I guess I came into the work more predisposed to be like, sure, let's see, what are the arguments for and against? And I just left the nonfiction going, yeah, there still seems to be the reasonable doubt that I assumed existed. And I was more just actually kind of disappointed in how academics have treated other people doing research, even if they truly believe that they're wrong, even if that's what we end up believing, that these people who have been doing their own research are wrong. That's the whole freaking point of peer review. And these works aren't even allowed to be peer reviewed. And it's just like, or when they aren't even like given like, no, like at least in science, when you're peer reviewed and you have multiple reviewers who say why your work can or cannot be published, you will have to be given very specific reasons why and ways that you could edit your works to make it more proof or whatever. And here it was like there was literally a manuscript that was not accepted, and it gave one excuse that wasn't actually even like valid. And it was just, so it's all more the academic process that I have issues with, because I don't actually have stakes in who William Shakespeare is. Like, I don't. I just thought it was very interesting, and it actually gave me a little bit more insight into how English literature became this big kind of thing in academia, because it wasn't always a part of colleges, and the potential roles it had in shaping and controlling society. And it kind of, ironically, it answered one of my questions of like, why have I always been reading so much Shakespeare? Not that I dislike Shakespeare, and not that he's not good. Like, there are plenty of classic authors who are very good that I do not read as much as we read Shakespeare. So I was just like, okay, so this is why in my American AP Lit class we read King Lear for some reason. You know, like, there are American playwrights we probably could have been reading. Like, that would have probably fit the curriculum better. So yeah, and it was fascinating. I was not expecting the amount of passion in my comments section when I posted my Friday reads for that. Which just goes to show that a lot of people have a lot more attachment to the identity of the author of Shakespeare's works than I do. And that's cool. Like I said, for me, it's one of those things where like it feels so far ago in history. Like, in my own family, we have pretty good records through to the 1600s, and even then we're not like 100% sure who we're related to and things like that, and we have like fairly good records. And here it seems like the records are just not quite as clear, at least to make it definitive. Like I said, maybe it's just my silly little scientist brain who would want more direct evidence to be convinced. But that's all I'll say. I thought it was a compelling podcasty type nonfiction, so if that's what you like. Sometimes I got bored. Sometimes they were focusing on parts of history, and I'm like, oh, I don't know any of these names, and again, not that invested. But it does point out like a lot of the different ones, and I don't think it ever tells you which one the author believes in, other than I think the author for sure doesn't necessarily believe that William Shakespeare was the author. So there is that bias going into it, and this is the author of an Atlantic article. So it was from that experience that this book kind of became born from. And she does in detail like talk about the people she's tried to talk to and how those interactions with, and basically how this book kind of came to be and her decision to even put it out there. So you get a little bit of the author, but it's really not about the author of the nonfiction. But like all nonfictions, there is a bias, and there's the bias for this one. What's the next thing that I finished? Let's see, that was 3. So I think we'll talk about Swordheart next. Yes, this is by T. Kingfisher. I'm excited to get the Saint and Steel series, because a lot of people have been hyping it up later. This one was really good for me until the third act breakup, which I've talked about a lot, and then it recovered a bit by the end, but I just didn't think it needed it. I think there is a way to get to the whole, oh no, we have to save them, separation, third act thing, without making our main character, who has generally been fairly empathetic and smart and caring, suddenly be mad about a thing that I didn't even know she would be mad at. It didn't make sense why she was mad at the thing she was mad at. Because I'm like, what stakes do you have in a thing that happened in a culture that's not your own thousands of years ago? Why does that make you so mad? It was weird. it did not click to me, the level of anger she had. And then, like I said, she's a fairly resourceful character, and she just, like, in that anger that I didn't think had a good source, did something dumb. Now, if the anger I felt was justified, doing something dumb and out of character out of anger is fine. So that was weird to me. That said, I love the horror forest. That forest is so silly and scary and creepy. I really liked the dynamics of our two characters. And also there's a really great friendship in this story between a priest and our main character. And learning more about the different religions is really quite fun in this world, and how they work and how they collide and cooperate. That's been very fun. So the world building of the World of the White Rat has been very interesting to me. Next up, I finished the Lost Ark, or the last, I don't know, it's this book here. Oh, here, it's right next to me. Lost Ark Dreaming. I have my physical book next to me. So this is the same author who's written Son of the Storm, I think. There's a fantasy series out. And actually, what I took away from reading this novella is that I should try out his fantasy trilogy. Probably once the third book, we know when it's coming out. Like, I don't need it to be out, but since the first two are out, I might as well kind of wait. Because I really connected to these characters pretty quickly, and I felt these characters were fairly distinct. And that's always a great sign for me and an author, is if, like, the thing I'm vibing with is how you create a character, we can go pretty far. Like, for example, with T. Kingfisher, my first short story was what I read about from her, and it was in, like, Mystic Dreams. And I'm like, man, I'm very invested in these two characters. It's, like, 10 pages, and one of them's a duck. So I should try some of her work. So that's kind of, like, the green flag I was giving. In general, though, this novella wasn't, like, a huge standout for me. Its comps are Snowpiercer meets The Deep, and The Deep by River Solomon, Snowpiercer, the movie. And that I see that. I don't actually think those are bad comps, but I guess I don't know if I like those things meshed together. Because for the first half, you do have that, like, action-packed societal discussion darkness of Snowpiercer. Because you're in this tower, and people who live above the waterline are, you know, better off than the people who live below the waterline. And we have a bunch of people who are the midders going down to solve this mystery of did something get in, and it's a whole thing. And that is tense, and it's, like, stressful, and you're learning about the world and our characters and their pasts. And then when the unknown becomes known is when we enter more the stuff that I would comp to The Deep by River Solomon, and it's not bad. But suddenly, like, the momentum completely leaves the story, and I have to adjust to a different type of story. Like, The Deep was always ponderous and meandering and, what's it called? Like, you're thoughtful, introspective. And that meshed with the action we started with in the beginning was jarring to me, and I never quite got back into the groove because it's so short. So I think, and, like, it does attempt, I think, to introduce that introspective feeling earlier, because you have this kind of mixed media thing where sometimes you have these poems, and I think it's supposed to make you slow down and think, but it didn't really actually do that. And then also I was a little confused about our goals and what they would accomplish, which wasn't like a deal breaker, but again, it did add to my lack of momentum at the end of this novella. So truly not a bad time. And like I said, I'm more positive about reading more of this author's works, but I would rather watch Snowpiercer, or I'd rather read The Deep than read this again, if that makes sense. And then the next thing we'll talk about, I don't think I've talked about it all on the channel, the next two things. Well, actually, one of them I have, or I've briefly mentioned them, but they've not gotten official review space in any video. And so one is Not in Love by Ali Hazelwood. I read this in, like 24 hours, which is what I do usually with a contemporary romance, is, just kind of, they're just like very compulsively readable for me. I really enjoy them. And this one I knew was like physical attraction, lust forward. And love would come later, which I know is not everyone's like favorite trope. And I hadn't read that in a while, but it actually really worked for me. And I really liked how cold and distant our main character was, or our main female character. It has both perspectives. It has Rue and Eli, and they both have their own baggage, and they both are more comfortable in physical relationships than they are emotional ones. And it's basically about how it's very similar, honestly, to any of the kind of recovery from traumas that you would see in an Abby Jimenez, but it's not going to be as well developed because the focus is still more on this really weird sci-fi, like not sci-fi, although it feels sci-fi, the science work environment plot, and a lot of sexy times and stuff like that. so I just found it compulsively readable. I liked it more than Bride in terms of like it kept me turning the pages. I was really invested. I was waiting for the next, big chemistry scene because they keep trying to not be with each other, but they can't not because the chemistry is off the charts. And whether that chemistry works or doesn't work for you is what's going to make or break the book. If you're the type of reader who actually needs for them to have formed like an actual like emotional bond first, that's not going to happen. It does grow. But that's not where we start from, and it probably doesn't start growing to like 60-70% of the way through the book, if I'm being honest. Also, if you, like me, maybe don't love that Allie Hazelwood always needs there to be a villain, that's like, I don't know, her way of doing a third act breakup is having a villain. Which is weird in a contemporary romance, in my opinion, because there's never a villain in your contemporary life. Like, it's just weird to me. It throws me out of the story more than everything else, even though everything else is equally absurd. And I guessed who the villain would be of this one very, very early. And so it was kind of just annoying watching my character, who's supposed to be smart, be so dumb. And be like, it's like a horror movie, like a campy horror movie. You're like, oh my god, you need to talk to this person. Do not trust them. But no, you just have to wait for it to fall out and stuff like that. In some ways, though, that didn't actually really affect like the romance as badly as I thought it would. That was more of an issue for me in Love on the Brain. Here, it's like she always had this trust issue with the guy because like he's coming in to help like change the chain of command in the company she works for, and like the CEO is like her best friend and stuff like that. So like there was already like distrust there, so it's not like she suddenly like knew him and then found out later he was coming to break up her company and like, oh my god, the betrayal. So at least it wasn't that bad. So that was Not in Love. Good time. Enjoyed that. And then the last thing I read and finished, which honestly I really wasn't expecting to, but it's all my brain wanted to do, so I just let my brain do it. And that was reread Oathbringer. And I read all of that in record time, honestly. I think I finished it in like 10 days, maybe 14 days. I don't know. For me, that's really fast for Oathbringer, because Oathbringer is a long boy. Like we say, I only read 7 books this month. But if one of them was the entirety of Oathbringer, I read like 1,300 pages in like, so that's like 4 books. So really, I read like 11 books, maybe 10, depending. But I really like Oathbringer, and maybe it's my favorite now, and I don't know how to process that. Like, for years, like probably since 2014, my favorite book of all time was probably Words of Radiance. So the fact that maybe Oathbringer is my favorite in the series in which Words of Radiance is in is weird. But I'm getting like the same rewarding vibes from Oathbringer that I got from Well of Ascension. So I've reread Mistborn 4 times, I think. And every time Well of Ascension has just solidified itself as more and more my favorite. Whereas on my first read, Well of Ascension, I was a little off-put by its pacing. And it's not dissimilar to how my first read of Oathbringer, the pacing was really off-putting, but then rereads, you know where the story's going, so you're more prepared for the pacing. And I think that's just what's happened to me, and it's when I start having, like, my favorite character moments, it's when I start really forming my opinions on who these people are, and you really see their growth. You learn some wacky things about the world, and especially reading it after remembering the reveals in its book itself and Rhythm of War. It's so good. It's so good. I had a really good time with it. It was it was exactly the type of comfort I needed. So that's this wrap up. If you don't want to just tell me what was your favorite, did you do any rereads, what was your least favorite, you can just leave a little emoji to let me know you're here. And let's leave a heart for Not in Love. That seems simple. Color of your choice. The cover of the book, I think, is pink, so you can go that way if you don't want to make a decision today. If the decision tree is already full. And yeah, otherwise, like if you liked it, subscribe if you want to, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.